All right, good morning, everybody. Today is Daf, I think Yagimel and Yadalit. Today's Yadalit, yesterday's Yagimel. So we left off the bottom line of Yud Beis and Beis at the bottom. It's actually a quote from our Mishnah. So if you look back at our Mishnah, they said, I'm just reading from the Mishnah. The Mishnah said over there, Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amar, and the Mishnah is on Yud Aleph and Beis that I'm just reading from. It says the name of Rabbi Shmuel Amar Talmud Echad. So a Talmud said, basically quoting Rabbi Shmuel, Lifnei Rabbi Kiva, and said that before Rabbi Kiva. And he said, so then he said, no, there was no machlokas, anything less than Dalet Amos. There is no machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. In other words, Beis Shammai would not require more than either a lechi or a korah. Where they argue only al rachav me'arba amos v'yad eser, right? Beis Shammai yamim lechi v'korah, Beis Hillel yamim oy lechi or korah. Then they have the machlokas that we learned earlier in the Reisha of the Mishnah that goes on anything between 4 and 10. Obviously, more than 10, everyone holds is no good because the entrance is too big. But between 4 and 10, that's the machlokas, whether Beis Shammai requires a lechi and a korah, or Beis Hillel requires only one or the other. And Amar Rabbi Kiva alzeh v'alzeh nechlu. No, they argue both cases even less than Dalet Amos, not only from 4 to 10, but even 4 and less. So that was the quote from the Mishnah. And Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amar Tamracha v'chulei. That was the Mishnah brings the Gemara brings that quote, and then actually brings the next quote also without sort of usually he has a quote from the Mishnah, then some Gemara, but over here then brings another quote. And Rabbi Kiva Aimer alzeh v'alzeh nechlu. And then Rabbi Kiva says no, there's a machlokas and even less than 4. Now let's see the Gemara. So first of all, Rabbi Kiva hainu Tanakama. Rabbi Kiva is the Tanakama, right? Rabbi Kiva says there's always a machlokas. And Tanakama l'chari just said there's a machlokas. He never stipulated as to more than Dalet Amos, less than Dalet Amos. In terms of the entrance, where the machlokas is. So Yikabrayu derav achle v'itema Rav Yechiel. V'lei misayim. How no machlokas is the case that we brought the other day of achle, and some say it was Rav Yechiel in terms of the case of where your Dalet Amos entrance is even though it's wide Dalet Amos the mavui, but the entrance itself is less. Right, it's even less. It's even down to 4 tefachim. Right, very narrow way. So therefore, even something up to 4 tefachim, that's where the machlokas. One opinion holds that over there in that case, right, up until 4 is the machlokas, and the other one says no, that something that which is less than 4 tefachim does not need any sort of mavui or does not need any more korah or lechi. So Tanya, Amar Rabbi Kiva, and Loi Amar Rabbi Shmuel davar zeh, elo oisa Talmud Amar davar zeh, v'halach ch'maisa Talmud. So says Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Shmuel didn't say this. Or no, I know Rabbi Shmuel, he's a great man. He didn't say this. It's not true. And a certain Talmud said it, and the halach is like that Talmud. So the Gemara says, first of all, Hagu v'kashya. First of all, he said Rabbi Shmuel didn't say this, basically saying that halacha is like not like this. And then then he said the halacha is like that Talmud. So no, he only said it basically to go ahead and basically to sharpen the students. You see that that even though Rabbi Shmuel didn't say it, perhaps if a Talmud says it, and the halacha could be kamaisa, we can say the halacha is like him. In other words, you have the potential if you have a good svara, right, or a good halacha, that the halacha could be like you. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Omar Nira and Itamar. He didn't say halacha kamaisa. He said Nira, right? Nira kaisa Talmud. Right? It appears like him, not necessarily saying passing the halacha is like him. He just said it appears like him. So Omar, now going back on this statement. So Omar, Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Kol ma'akal b'sha'ata ma'itzi mishum Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Tamaracha lifnei Rabbi Kiva. Anytime you have someone quoting Rabbi Shmuel and then basically going to Rabbi Kiva, basically a Talmud of both, Eino elo Rabbi Meir, sheshimesh es Rabbi Shmuel v'es Rabbi Kiva. That is referring to none other than Rabbi Meir, because he was a Talmud both by Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Yishmael. The Tanya and Rice, I'm Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yishmael, Hayisi Matil, when I used to be by Rabbi Yishmael, I used to go ahead and put some kankantom, right? It was a certain type of, ink or whatever goes in the ink, some sort of, from plants, into the ink, right, in order to make it permanent. Amar li davar. He never said anything to me. He never said boo. It was no problem. However, Rabbi Kiva, Asar alai. However, when I went for Rabbi Kiva, and I used to go ahead and try and put the kankantom into my ink when I would go ahead and do my safras, he would stop me. He'd say, "You're not allowed to do it." So Gemara says, "Eini, is this true?" V'amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Mishum Rabbi Meir, Kshaiti loy be'etz Rabbi Kiva yisi matel kankantom v'sachadyo. When I was learning by Rabbi Kiva, right? This is the opposite, right? And it's the opposite way, right? I was learning by Rabbi Kiva, right? I used to go ahead and put kankantom into my ink. And Rabbi Kiva never said anything to me. Ukshabati is Rabbi Shmuel. Amar li, when I came for Rabbi Shmuel, he said to me, B'ni mamlachtecha, my son, right? What is, what type of work are you in? Samarti lo, love Larani, I'm a cipher. So Amar li, B'ni, havi zir mamlachtecha, shemachta melecha shamayim. Be careful, because what's it called? If you got to be careful what you're doing, because that which you do is Melech HaShamayim, is the work of Hashem. And Shema'ata Mechasa Isachas, Umiata Isachas, Uvenimtzas, Machav is Kolam Kula, add a letter or take out a letter, right? Rashi gives a couple examples over here, right? Hashem Elkeichem Emes, if you take out the Aleph, right? It's Hashem Elkeichem Meis, stuff like that. So you can destroy the world, right? You got to be careful, be very careful with your Safras. So what did he answer them? So he says, no. So he said, no. I have a secret, right? Kankantom Shemo, and it's called Kankantom. Shani Mati L'Seichadio. I go ahead and put it in the ink. So Amarli said to me, he says, wait, are you even allowed to do it? The Torah says, the Kasav Umacha. It says over there by the Sota. We know by the Sota, a woman, right, who was suspected of adultery by her husband, right? She was warned before. So no, the test is they basically take the parsha from Sota and they put it in water. They put it in water for it to dissolve. If it comes off, right? So over there, it has to be something that what's it called? That erases, right? So if you put this as kakantom, which is basically permanent, it doesn't allow it to erase. You're not allowed to use it. So how can you go ahead and put kankantom into your ink if you're not allowed to use it? So because of a macha. So because of sheach alimchais. So it has to be writing that's able to be erased. So my kamarle. So that was the answer. So my kamarle and my kamahadale. So what was the back and forth here? So hachi kamarle so them. It's not only that he said Rabbi Meir, I'm not only that I'm an expert in chaseres and yaseres, I know exactly where the extra letters go and the words that are chassid that don't have all the letters, right? That I'm a bakian on el afilu miachesh lezvuv nami dil ma'asev yasiv atage dedela so machikle mashile reish. Perhaps what's going to happen if I'm writing a safras, a fly is going to come by, land, let's say on the tip of a dalet, and it's going to erase the corner tip of the dalet, and if you erase the dalet, right, the part that sticks out, it'll make it turn into a reish. So in order to avoid that, so I have this secret ingredient called the kakantom, and then I put it into the ink. So that's what he said to him. He says, I use that ink in order to avoid any mishaps, and that was what he said to him. So nevertheless, kasha shimush. Kasha, asra. So first of all, we have two kashas. First of all, we have a kasha in terms of who was he mishamish, right? Was he mishamish Rabbi Shmuel first, or was he mishamish Rabbi Kiva first, right? Who was he a Talmud first, Rabbi Meir? And second of all, who was the one who asked the kankanto, right? Well, one apparently said Rabbi Kiva was the one who asked, and the other one is Rabbi Shmuel. So what's going on here? So the Gemara says now. Bish lama shimush lakasha. I understand why shimush is not a kasha. Why? So meikara also the kamei Rabbi Kiva. But in the beginning, he went to learn by Rabbi Kiva. Meir was a big tamachach. Went to Rabbi Kiva. However, he couldn't learn from him. Right? Rabbi Meir wanted to come to learn halacha, and Rabbi Kiva basically was he basically gave the two svaras, right? And he was too much, right? In Svara, and Rabbi Meir couldn't do it. So also the Kamei Rabbi Shmuel, the Gemara. So he went before Rabbi Shmuel, and then he learned basically the Gemara. He learned all the halachas there. He got solid. The Halder also the Kamei Rabbi Kiva Savara, or then he came to Rabbi Kiva to start doing more, pilpul, right? So in the beginning, it was too much for him, and he had then to go ahead and learn by Rabbi Yishmael. And after he knew it backwards and forward, then he was able to go by Rabbi Kiva with all the pilpul, hearing the two sides. So in other words, he did go to Rabbi Kiva first, and then he was by Rabbi Yishmael, and then Rabbi Kiva. So he was actually by each of them before the other one. Ella Asra Kasha. Who was the one? Asra is a Kasha. You're right, it's a Kasha. Now, Tanya, we're going to Raisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Rav Meir Hay Omer. So Rabbi Yehuda said Rav Meir used to say, "L'chol matilin kankantom l'sechadiyah chuz and parsha sota." You can go ahead and put kankantom into the ink, except for the parsha of sota. The Rabbi Kiva Omer Mishma, and Rabbi Kiva said in his name, chuz and parsha sota shebamikdash. Not only in the parsha sota that was in the mikdash. Now there was a special parsha, the one that was used in the mikdash, and that was the one that we used for parsha sota to go ahead and to test a sota. However, when it came to the other Sefer Torah, you can go ahead and put the kankantom into it. So my benayu. What's the nafka? So Rabbi Yirmiyah lemichak law minatar ikabenayu, right? Whether you're allowed to go ahead and basically test it from a regular Sefer Torah, right? That according to the Tanakama, right? You are allowed to, and according to the second opinion, which was Rabbi Yaakov, there was a special one that was written in the Torah. And v'hani tanai kihani tanai. Actually, that machlokas tanaim was like this machlokas tanaim. The tiny one, right? So ein megillah like sheira, lashkaisa but saita acheres, right? So you say the megillah is not kosher to go ahead and if you write, let's say you have a parsha, and you're going to head and use it for one woman to go ahead and test her. You can't use that same parsha to test somebody else. Let's say in the end, it wasn't used for her. It was used for someone else. You can't use it. So you can go ahead and use it for another sota. So is this the machlokes that according to Rabbi Yoshia, right? So in other words, you can use a regular sefer, right? It doesn't need to be anything specific, and therefore that'll be like the first opinion we had, and the other one seems to say, no, you can't use for somebody else. It has to be a specific one. And Amar Papa, no, perhaps these two machlokes are not.
I have a question.
Yes.
This implies that for the Parsha Sota, they actually cut up that portion from the Sefer Torah itself. But I always assumed that they wrote a separate Parsha of Sota, and they didn't actually destroy a Sefer Torah to do it.
Right. So over here, so according to the second opinion, right, which was Rabbi Yaakov. He seemed to say chutz mi parshas sota shebamikdash, right? Except for the parsha sota that was in the mikdash. So it could either be that it was just the parsha that was written in the mikdash, or in other words, maybe it was a Sefer Torah, but they took out that, or maybe that they only used that Sefer Torah. And even that Sefer Torah that was written, right, perhaps they used different inks, and just to make sure that they used the ink for the sota, right? But it's not clear. I guess we'll have to wait, a year or two, right, until we get more into halachas of the sota, right? But over here, right, it calls it the parsha sota of the mikdash, but lav dafka could be the entire sefer of the Sefer Torah that was in the mikdash, and just that the parsha of that Sefer Torah has to be cannot be written with the unerasable ink. So let's see. So we said no. Perhaps the two machlokes is not the same, right? Whether you can do one for who is supposed to be for one, or whether that you can use any Sefer Torah, just the kankantom and that. So he says, why ad kaloi kamatara kamahasam? Maybe over there the Tanakama said that Megillah is not kosher to do another sota. Because since over there, right, that it was made for, in other words, it was written for Rachel. So then you can't go ahead and use it for Leah. But regarding a Sefer Torah, that basically was written without any sort of intentions. Then you can use it for somebody else. In other words, since it wasn't written for the intentions of using for a person, it would be okay. And Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak Dilmi also the same adkan like Rabbi Yachai Bar Yoshia Hasamelo Dichti Miha L'Shum Sota B'Yelam, because it was written for a specific sota. V'Gabe Torah L'Samik Siva, but a Sefer Torah which was written for it to learn. Hachinam Lo Mechakinon. Maybe over there, right, you would not be able to use the same one. So that what she said is kshera to go ahead and another sefer, as long as it was written for without intentions, then you can use it for anybody. So perhaps the two machlokesim are not. Are not comparable. However, says the Gemara, the less lay l'Rabachai bar Yoshia hadatnan. But what about that? That which we say in the Mishnah says, "Kasav get legarish isha." A person writes a get to divorce his wife. v'nimlach, and then he changes his mind. Umatza ben iro, v'yamar shemecha kashmi, v'shem ishtecha kashem ishti. So he finds somebody in the same town because written in the get is name of the place and his name and her name. So he finds someone in the same town who has his name and who has her name and says, hey, look, funny enough, right? We each have the same name. Or just take, you want to divorce your wife. I'll save you a couple of bucks. Use my get that I already wrote, but I changed my mind. I wasn't going to use it. So over there we say, pasul legaresh bo. It's pasul to garsha. So why over there can you say you could use the same? You can't use the same get, but over here you can use the same sefer for erasing. So where it says Hachi Ashag Demirdu Hasa because of law be ksiv. Over there the Torah says because of law is beina ksiv lishma. Therefore you need ksiv lishma. However Hacha, but over here it says Vyasa law. It says over here you should do for her ksiv. Beina nasiya you need asiya lishma. And asiya dida mechikahi. And the only asiya here is the erasing. In other words, you have to erase it for her. In other words, you have to put it in the water for her. Right? They don't have to write it for her. So now, in the case of the get, the action to do for her lishma is the writing. So therefore, you can't go ahead and use it if it was for Rachel to use it for Leah. But over here, right, the only action is to dissolve it. Obviously, if it was put in water and then he changes his mind and there's another sota, you want to use it for Leah instead of Rachel, that you can't do. But in terms of the writing, writing doesn't have the lishma when it comes to in the case of the sota. And Amar Rav Acha Bar Chanina Galu Yadu Lifnei Misha Amar V'Haya Olam She'ein B'Doro Sh'Rameir K'Maisa. It was known even to Hashem that there was nobody in the generation of Rameir like him. And what's the reason why the halach is always not like Rameir? Because they couldn't understand him. Why? And al tahor tameh v'marlo panim, because he could say which is something which is tahor, it's tameh, and something which is tameh, which is tahor, and he can give a svara to it, and the people wouldn't be able to differentiate. So since he can always give a svara of both sides, therefore it was almost impossible to say which svara made more sense to say the halach is like him. And Tana Lloyd Rabbi Meir Shemo, his name was Rabbi Meir Ella Rabbi Nerai Shemo. Why they call Shemo Rabbi Meir? Why they call Rabbi Meir? Shu Meir Eina Chacham b'Halacha, because he would enlighten the eyes of the Chachamim. And some say also his name was not even Norai. Ella Rabbi Nechemia Shemo, and some say it's Rabbi Elazar ben Arach Shemo, V'lamani Kros Shemo Norai. What is it called Norai? Once again, Shemanan here Einei Chacham b'Halacha, right? Because he would light up the eyes of the Chachamim when it comes to Halacha. And Amar Rebbe Hai de Michidana Michabarai. The reason why I was sharper than my friends is the Chazise Rabbi Meir Ma'achorai, because I saw Rabbi Meir from behind. And if I would have seen it even from the front, right, then it would have been even sharper. The pasuk says, right? Your eyes should go ahead and see your teachers. So he saw his teacher, he saw Rabbi Meir, and that was the reason why he had that special schus. He was even greater than his other friends. And Amar Rabbi Yeval, Amar Rabbi Yechon, Talmid Haya Loy Rabbi Meir v'Sumchus Shema. Right, so Rabbi Meir had a Talmid. His name was Sumchus. Shehaya Omer Al Kol Davar v'Davar Shal Tuma Arboim Ushmona Tamei Tuma v'Al Kol Davar v'Davar Shal Torah Arboim Ushmona Tamei Torah. For everything that was he ruled Tamei, he can give 48 reasons why he was Tamei, and everything that was Torah, he can give 40 reasons why it was Torah. And Satana Talmud Vosik Haya B'Yavna Shei Matayis Asheretz B'Meya V'Chamishim Tamim. Right, there was even a Talmud of his in Yavna that he could be Matahir. Right, he can bring from a svara to say that a sheretz, right, a sheretz that dies, one of the 8 Kippur callers, if it wasn't for the fact that the Torah says it's tameh, he can give it several reasons, right, or several 150 reasons why it should be tahor. And Amar Ravina, Ana, so he said Ravina. So Ani Adon Vatarenu. I can go ahead and give a svar and say why it's tahor. So man no hashemei samar tumas tahor. Just like if a snake, right, which kills and makes a lot of tuma, it itself is tahor, because a dead snake is tahor. It's not considered to be a sheretz, right? So sheretz shein amazing marba tuma lokoshigan. So a sheretz which does not kill, right? Most of the sheratzim are not, attackers and killers, right? So certainly, excuse me, certainly they should be tahor, right? If a snake which causes tuma, it itself is tahor. So it's a sheretz which doesn't cause others to become tummy by killing them. Certainly, if it dies, it should be tahor. However, maybe you can say that this the snake is just a maisakos, just like it's like a thorn. Thorn doesn't do anything, right? So too, right? It does not. Maybe you can say that the snake also doesn't go ahead and act and creates tuma, because in other words, it's acting like a thorn. The tuma, that which dies, right, is tummy on its own. It's not the snake that's causing it to become tummy. It's just the animal. So therefore, you can't really use that as a svar. Fine. Now, Omar Rabbi Abba Amar Shmuel Shloish Shonim Nechlu Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. So for 3 years they argued. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Halu Amrim Halacha Maseinu, Halu Amrim Halacha Maseinu. Each one said the halacha was like them. Yas Tabaskal v'Yamra Elu ve'Elu Divrei Elokim Chayim Hein. Right. Both of these are Divrei Elokim. Both of them are words of Hashem. However, the halacha k'Beis Hillel. The halacha is like Beis Hillel. So Baskal said after 3 years of machlekes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So if both of them are Elu Elu Divrei Elokim, so why is halacha like Beis Hillel and not Beis Shammai? Mipnei she'neichen va'aluvin hayu, right? Because Beis Hillel, they were known to be neichin, right? They were pleasant, and a lubin, right? And Rashi says a lubin is sablonim, right? They were soivel, they absorbed, they weren't makpid on their kavod, and the shining divrei Beis Shammai. And they also learn that which Beis Shammai knows. They weren't just learning their own stuff. They also say, okay, what does Beis Shammai say about this? Not only that, but they would even basically, when they would talk about them and Beis Shammai, they would refer to Beis Shammai first, show respect. Like that, what you learned. There's a case of a person whose head and most of his body was in a sukkah. However, his sukkah was too small, and his house. And his table was in the house, right? So the shaila is whether he's going to follow his table and basically sit outside the sukkah. So Beis Shammai paisan, Beis Hillel machshir. Beis Shammai says pasal, Beis Hillel machshir, and Amru Beis Hillel Beis Shammai loy kachaya ma'isa. Right? Wasn't there a ma'isa which occurred? And when they quote the ma'isa, what they say, shaholchu ziknei Beis Shammai v'ziknei Beis Hillel v'akas Rabbi Yochanan ben Acharonis. And then when they quoted the ma'isa, they said that the Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel went to go ahead and visit Rabbi Yochanan ben Acharonis. So in other words, they showed respect by listing Beis Shammai before Beis Hillel. And they found that he was sitting with his head and majority of his body in the sukkah, and his table was in the house. And then Beis Shammai says, you see, it's good. So he says, they would tell, even then, those around who were of Beis Shammai back then, because Beis Shammai was multiple generations of the yeshiva of Shammai. They strongly said to him, it says that this is the way you send your sukkah every year. You've never filled the mitzvah sukkah because it's puzzle. So you can't bring a rye from that case because fakert, right? They held that it was no good. But you see from this Maisa that Beis Hillel gave the uttermost respect to Beis Shammai by even calling them first. And so what does that come to teach you? A person who lowers himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will raise him up. And whoever raises himself up, right, he tries to be haughty and get covered, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will lower him. Whoever goes ahead and searches to become for greatness, right? In other words, for gaiva, the gedula will run away from him. But someone who runs away from being a prominent member and being, having honor to him, if he runs away from it, then the gedula will run towards him. And whoever basically tries to go ahead and force the time, then the time will basically it's not for him. In other words, he can't rush something which is not meant to be. But a person who basically waits for time, then the time will come sooner rather than later. And Tanur Rabbanim shtei shanim mechza nechlu Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. For 2.5 years, they argued Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Halu aimrim noach lo adam shelo nivra yosem mishenivra. V'halu aimrim noach lo adam shenivra yosem shelo nivra. Right? Some said better for a person not to be created in this world than to be created because there's too much yitzhara to fight. And the other said that no, it's better for a person to be created than not to be created because the person has the ability to do mitzvahs. So Nimnu, they go in the end, they said, Noyach lo li adam shelo nivra yosem mishenivra. Right? Really, it was better that we shouldn't have been here. However, Achshav now, Shenivra, now that we were here, we should go ahead, and a person should go ahead and inspect his deeds and make sure that he's acting appropriately. Right? Actually, the first one, right? The first one was that which he already did, right? That which he already did. Then he should go ahead and check those averos and then change it for the future. And Yimashvish b'masav means that he should be very careful if something comes to him, that whether, if I do the mitzvah, if I miss out on the mitzvah, so then he should be very, inspect and examine, I guess, his actions. Fine. Now Mishnah. Mishnah says in the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Beis, back to Eruvin, Hakoire Sha'amru. This beam that we discussed, Rechava Kedei Lekabel Ariach. It has to be wide enough to hold an Ariach. And what is Ariach? The Ariach Chatzi Levena Shal Shloisha Tefachim. An Ariach is a half a brick, right, which was 3 tefachim. So in other words, these bricks, they were basically 3 by 3 tefachim with the full bricks. So a half brick is basically cut in half is 3 by 1.5. So something which is 1.5 placed. So a korah has to be wide enough that you can place a 1.5 brick on this korah. Sounds like the korah has to be 1.5, right? However, it says over there, however, it says no, it's enough for basically the korah to be a tefach wide. So you might have a little bit on one side, a little bit on the other side. So basically, if you have 1.5 sticking over, so you'll have a quarter on one side, quarter on the other side, and that will be okay. All right. So now, so in other words, it has to be wide enough to hold an ariach, and it has to be strong enough to hold an ariach. And so that was the opinion. One opinion. So the first opinion is of Tanakama, as the one will point out, that it has to be strong enough to hold a brick. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer Rechava Afal Pi She'ein Beria. So he says Rabbi Yehuda, right? Even though it's not strong enough, if let's say Haisa Shakash or Shakana, let's say it was made of reeds or sticks or something like that. Rowing, right? This is the concept of rowing, right? We consider it as long as it has the size. We consider it as if it has the strength to hold a brick. And akuma, and if it's bed, right? So kiluhi pshuta. The one will explain if it's bed, it will consider it as like it's straight. And agula, if it's round, reinasa kiluhi merubas. If it was rounded, let's say they couldn't balance on it. Nevertheless, we look like it's square. And kol sheish ba'keva shleisha tefachim yesh bo roichav tefachim. Anything that basically is 3 tefachim around, right? We say is the diameter would be a tefach. So as long as it's 3 tefach around, right, which is approximately 3, which is a little less than 3.14, so the diameter would be a tefach. Fine. That was the Mishnah. So let's see the Gemara. Zak the Gemara. Now, tefach. Right, so tefach l'mechzaboy. What do you mean? Why does the Mishnah say you need a tefach? Right, if you said you have to be able to hold a brick, and the brick is 1.5, so why do you all of a sudden the next sentence you say you have to only a tefach? What it should be a tefach and a half? So kevin the rachel l'kabel tefach either chati tefach malavin le'betina. Right, so he says no. Once you have it, so you can hold a tefach, then he can go ahead and either chati tefach, the other half of tefach malavin le'betina, he can go ahead and basically use for the cement. Mashma agisa v'kaima. And therefore, basically, if you have the core here and you put basically a brick on top and you have to cement it in, so basically you have like a quarter of cement, right, like sticking on each side in order to basically plaster the brick in. So therefore, you might have a quarter of a tefach hanging over on one side and a quarter tefach on the other side. But basically, that would be the space for the plaster to go next to the korah, and therefore it's okay. So basically, we're saying that as long as it's a tefach, it can hold a brick of hold a brick of 1.5 tefachim. Fine. And Omar Rabbi Rav Huna says, Rabbi Rav Huna, korah sha'amru tzricha shedei beria kedei lekabel ariach. Has to be, so that's korah, which we're talking about, has to be strong enough to go ahead and hold a half a brick. Umamidei korah, but that which holds up the korah, in other words, basically little pegs or something that holds the board. Let's say the korah wasn't attached directly to the walls, right? Let's say it was held up by some sort of pegs. those have to be even has to also be strong enough, right, to hold up our mamide kara. So he said over there in terms of the mamide kara, right, does not have to be strong enough to go ahead and hold the bricks or half brick. And Rav Chizda Amar echad zeh v'echad zeh tzrichen sheyeh bring kedei lekabel kara v'rech. Now each one has to be able to be strong enough to hold the kara and a half brick. So now it has to be strong enough to hold both the ariach and the has to be the ariach and the kara. And Amrav Sheshes heniach kara agabi mavui.
What's an ariach?
Ariach is the Mishnah says a half brick, so it's 3 by 1.5. Right, ariach, right. The bricks were levena is a full brick, and ariach is a
half brick.
Yeah. So Amar Rav Sheshes, so says Rav Sheshes, heniach kaira al gabi mavui. Person puts a kara on a mavui uparas aleh machzelas, and he puts basically over a sheet, right, like draped over the machzelas. Then it's hanging off the ground from 3, so you don't see the beam, you just see like a sheet hanging down. It's off the guard. So kara and kan mechitza and kan, right? There is no kara because you don't see a beam, but you don't see any sort of wall. There's no wall here because it's by the ground. So kara and kan. So he says kara and kan because it's covered. And mechitza and kan, the havile mechitza shagadim boy kimbo, right? It's a wall. It's in sukkah. We'll see later on this path. It's a wall that an animal can walk underneath. If it's already 3 tefachim off the ground, basically a small animal can walk underneath it. So therefore, it's no longer a functional wall. And since it's not a functional wall, therefore it's not considered a wall, and therefore the mavui is considered you can't carry it. And Taner Rabbanan kaira hayatzim and kaisel zeh. If you have a beam that starts at one wall and it doesn't extend all the way to the other end, the two karos, and each one come out from a wall. They don't touch each other in the middle. If it's within 3 tefachim of the other wall or 3 tefachim with one another, so you don't have to bring another beam there. It's close enough. We say that lavud, he closed up the gap for 3 tefachim. However, shlosha, but if it's 3, then if it's more than 3, then then you have to go ahead and bring another beam to cover up the gap. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Omer, no, pachas me arba'a. So machlokes throughout, but lavud, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel does not hold as 3 tefachim. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds lavud is 4 tefachim. Ain't tzarich lavi karacheres. If it's 4, you don't have to bring less than 4. You don't have to karacheres. However, if it's arba, if it is 4 tefachim, then tzarich lavi karacheres. Then you do have to go ahead and bring a karacheres. V'chein shtei karas hamisamos. So let's say you have 2 thin karas next to one another. Each one on their own are not able to go ahead and are wide enough to hold a half brick. However, so we say, if together they can go ahead and if you put it next to each other, they can support a brick. Then it's fine. Bring another one. However, if not, then then you have to go ahead and bring another beam. And Rav Shimon Gamliel says something different. He says over here, no, if the 2 of them are together, right, and you could take a brick instead of being the 1.5 way, the long way, the 3 way, right, and basically put them along the 2 koras, then that is sufficient for these 2 to act together as a kora, right? That's such as the picture. Those of you have the art scroll, the picture over there. So you see that you have the 2 koras and you have the brick going the long way. That is considered to be sufficient. And hayu, hayu achas l'mala v'achas l'mata. But let's say they were different heights. One was higher than the other. Right? We view the top one of is below. And the lower ones, the above one of those, we consider them together. As long as neither of them violate the conditions of being over 20 amos or under 10 tefachim. And Amar Abaye says about Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, Savarla Kavu B'chado Paligel B'chad. So this is Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, right? He was the one who brought this brisa. Right, he was the one who was mentioned the brisa. So this is Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, right? Rabbi Yehuda we mentioned before in our Mishnah. So he said Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda held like his father in one case and didn't hold like his father in another case. What do you mean? So he holds this concept of roin, right? As I said, over here we consider it as even though the two korahs are on different levels, we consider it this concept of rowing, right? We consider the two beams to be together. That's rowing, right? So toward our Mishnah, what Rabbi Yehuda said, even though it was made of straw, as long as it was wide enough, rowing, we consider it as if it's strong enough to hold the brick. Fine, so both of them hold the concept of rowing. However, applying but he argues Rabbi Yehuda another rule. What was the rule? According to Rabbi Yehuda, if you remember the first Mishnah on Beis, we had Rabbi Yehuda that said, a korah above 20 amos, no problem. So Rabbi Yehuda holds above 20 amos is still good. However, Rabbi Yehuda but over here, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the two beams, even though they're separate, we consider them together as long as the higher one is not above 20, right? So you see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that above 20 is no good. That he argued with his father. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rechava Alpha Bishin V'Riya. And it's wide, even though it's not strong enough, we say Keilu that it is considered to be strong enough to hold it. Now, so two dots. So he said over there, and Masni Lo Rabbi Yehuda Lechia Bar Rav Kamei de Rav. So it's taught. So Rabbi Yehuda Lechia Bar Rav in front of Rav. He said, Rechava Alpha Bishin V'Riya. Samarlei Asniya Rechava Bria. So he says, no. It says over here that even it has to be, it says it's not that he argued. In other words, he hold that our Mishnah didn't have that clause, right? He didn't hold that. So he said that he taught that it was, if as long as it's wide enough, even though it wasn't strong enough, he says no. It says it has to be strong enough and wide enough. And you said it has to be 4 tefachim, even though it's not strong enough. It has to be 4 tefachim. So Rechava Arba Shani. So he says, no, something which is 4 tefachim, that's different. 4 tefachim, then you don't need strength. Because something, if you require a korah which is 4 tefachim, right, that's much more than a tefach, right? It's 4 tefachim, then you can say, even if it's not strong enough, we look as if it's strong enough. But if it's only a tefach, then it has to be not only wide enough, i.e. a tefach, but also strong enough. But once it gets to 4, then you can say we consider it as if it's made of metal and it can hold a brick. And Haisa Shakash was made of straw or a reed. So my kamashman. So what's the chiddush here, right? So we say damrina roin hainohach. We already say roin, right? Why do you have to say straw or reed? We already said roin. If it's not strong, what's strong? What's the Mishnah coming to add by bringing this example? So as Malti Moses said, maybe we'd say that it has to be something of a material that's normally strong enough. But if something which is never that strong, straw is never, a reed is never that strong to hold a brick, maybe say it won't work. We'd say rowing. We consider that. In other words, maybe you'd think we only say rowing. Let's say if it was a very unsturdy, type of cement or metallic, right? That couldn't hold it. But only those things we say, okay, it could be a strong metal, but reed and that would maybe not good enough. We say no, it's fine. And we say if it was basically bent, we say as if it was straight. So once again, Gor says pshita, that's obvious, right? We say roi. So kamash belong to Reb Zera. We say like we said, Reb Zera. He b'sei chamavi v'kumaz chutz lamavi. Let's say, right, you have the beam going in front, and there's a bump in the beam, and that bump basically the bend comes outside of the mavli, right? It comes out. Like those of you who have the picture, right, in the art school, here's another, right, there's a picture there. So you have the picture where it's bent and it comes out. So you say over there, so he besay chamavi kamav chusamavi, or he besay chasar kamav lamal mesri. Let's say the bump goes up and not out, and it goes up over 20 amos, right? Just the bump goes over 20 amos. The rest of it is at 19.8, right? Or the bump is facing downward and it goes below 10 tefachim. If you take away the bend and it's less than 3 tefachim from where basically the bend was basically of a distance of 3 tefachim or less, you don't need another beam. If not, but if now the bend is longer than 3 tefachim, then basically you consider like it's not there, and now you need basically a beam to connect the two beams. So Gemara says, right? So he said, isn't it also obvious? So what's the chiddush there? So he said, no, let's say it's within the mavui and the bend goes outside the mavui. What would you say? Maybe you'd say if the bend goes out, maybe a person will carry up until the extent of the bend. And maybe the bend should be no good. In other words, it's worse than having a gap, right? Maybe it's worse because people might follow that, the gap and walk outside the mavui. So kamash malon, it's okay. And then we say agula roinas hakilahi muras. If it was round, we look as if it was square. So hasulamli, what do you have to teach us that for, right? So sefi tzrichle to teach us kol sheish be'akeva shleisha tfachim yesh ba rachav tefach. Anything that has a circumference of 3 tfachim, we know that it has a diameter of 1, right? So if it's 3 tfachim around, then you know the diameter is a tefach, right? And those of you who took math, right, which all of you did, but those of you who remember math, which not all of us do, right? It's, you can ask your children, right? So the circumference is 3.14 times the diameter. Fine. We know honey milli. Now, from where do we know this from? So we say, Amar, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, the pasuk says, Vayas es hayom motzak, eser be'ama misvaso al svaso agol saviv, v'chamesh be'ama kamasai, v'kav shloisha be'ama yasav oiso saviv. So you say, by Shlomo Melech, so he made basically for a mikvah, so he made a pool of 10 amos, and it says agul saviv, right? It was circular, 10 amos, right? And it was 5 amos high, and it was 30 around. So now, if it was 10 amos, right, and it was 30 around, we see, right, 10 and 30, 3 to 1, right? So 3 to 1 is the math that you don't need to go ahead and Google, to find out, to 3.14 or whatever, 3 times the diameter. So why was it? How was it over there across 30 on top? What are the edges, right? The edges shouldn't have added to the width. Right? It says over there, there's edges was like that of a flower. It's very thin. You have tefach, right? And it was thick. Tefach thick was the wall. However, right? Only the end of it was like a flower, but the bottom. So and therefore, but the walls were thicker towards the bottom, but on top it was very thin, like an alpayim bas yachil. It says there in 2000, right? 2000 bas yachil. It was able to hold. But what about the amount of the thickness? In other words, the thickness should have taken up space. So you're measuring the outside, right? So then some of the thickness of the walls would take away from the 2000 bas. Right? When they were going to head to calculate, it wasn't from the outside, rather from the inside of the water, and therefore it was talking about the amount of water that it held from the inside, not from the outside. But now we're going to go back to this. We're going to discuss this. So Tanya Reb Chia, Yom Sha'asa Shlomo, this mikvah, right, that Shlomo Melech made, Haya Machzik Meya V'Chamishim Mikvah Tahira. It was able to hold 150 mikvos, right, minimum size mikvos, right? A mikvah, so soon see it. So mikvah, so mikvah kamahavi. So okay, how much is a mikvah? You want to say it hold 150 mikvahs? Let's do some calculations. Let's do some math. Let's take out the calculator. So how much is a mikvah? Arbaim sa, 40 sa. All right, so 40 sa, Kedatanya. And how do you know where do you get the 40 sa? So Kedatanya, Barachas, it says over there, it says Barachas, B'sara b'mayim. You go ahead and wash yourselves in the water. B'mei mikvah. And say in the water of the mikvah, so kol b'sara mayim shekol gufa ilaben. It says, in other words, over there, the water has to be around his entire body. V'kamehein. And how much water do you need to be around a person, right, to be in a mikvah? So basically, amma al amma, barum shleish amos, right? Basically, a person is 3 by 1, right? Person's height, right, is approximately, his size is 3 by 1. So therefore, he has to be in a space of 3, right, 3 amos by 1 amma of cubic space, right, which is volume, right? Not just, his dimensions, but he has to be in the water. So imagine 3 cubes of amas, so basically 3, right, by 1, right? So he can fit in there, right? And how much is that? So that is 40 sa. Because a sa, right, is 3 cubic amos, right? So 3 cubic amos is a sa. So that's going to be our building block, all right? So now we have to basically figure out, right? So 3 cubic amos, is going to be 140 sa. So now we have to have this Yam Shlomo basically be, right, 3 cubic amos, right, which is 40 sa, times 150, which is 450 cubic amos. Now, let's see. Now, Kami Havilu, how much was it? Chamesh Mea Garmidi. It was 500, right? Because if you do the math we said was 100, right? Actually, 10 by 10, which is how much? 10 by 10 is 100, and it was 5 tall, right? So that's 500, right? So it should be it was 500. Now the class mea. So from now, let's say if you had it was 500. So just doing some math. So the Gemara sort of breaks it down, right? It breaks it down a little bit. So it says, okay, let's take 300 cubic amos from the 500 cubic amos. So, and Lamea v'chamishin, so Tlas Meya for 300 is 100, and Lamea v'chamishin for 150, right, is another 50 mikvahs. And that was 150 cubic amos is basically 50, right, 40 sas, right, is 50. So there's take 300 of it, make 100 mikvahs, and take 150 of it, and you make 50 mikvahs. 150. So therefore, you have 150. So Barabim Me'eh b'chamishin sagir. So the Gemara says, wait, 450 is enough. Then why was it 500? Right? This should be only 450 cubic amos, not 500. So it should be less than 10 by 10 by this. The Gemara says, so hani mili b'revoi. So that you're right. That the calculation works when something is a square. But as we all know, right, the volume, right, of a cube is more than that. You know, if it has the same outer dimensions as basically that of a cylinder, right, inside it. So however, Yam Shas Shlomo Eagle Habib, that was round. So it was rounded. So you have to take off. It wasn't exactly 5. It was only 5 from the middle of the circle, right? So the Gemara says, okay, wait, let's go back to now. How much more is a square than a circle? Ravi. It's a 1/4 more. So the arba me'amais, if that's the case, so from 400 of the original ones, in other words, it's not 500, it's only 400, right? So from 400 is 100 mikvahs, and lameya, and you only have 100 left, is esrim v'chamisha, right? So from 400, you have to divide it by 4, not by 3. So therefore, you have 100. Then you have also, and from the 100, you have is 25. So hani may have esrim v'chamisha habilu. There now you only have 125. In other words, basically doing the math, right? If you take instead of having the number 150 out of 450, basically you take away a quarter of 500, which is no longer 100. We take away a quarter of it. Now you only have 400 of it, or even less than that, right? Then you'd only end up with 125 mikvos. So the Gemara answers, it was a hybrid. So Tani, remember, very cheskel, Yam Shiosa Shlomo Shloish Amos Tachtonis Merivos. It's a very unique pool, right? Those are thinking about the pool. The bottom 3 amos, right, was actually square. So in other words, down at the bottom, it was actually square. It was 300. It was 10 by 10 by 3. So 100 times 3 is 300 cubic amos, which in turn is going to be 100 mikvos, right? So that's 100 mikvos in the bottom. And the top was shtayim elyonos agulos. And the top was 2, but that was circular. So if it was 200, but you take less than take a quarter away, which is basically the volume is only 150 cubic amos, and therefore you end up with basically the upper section had room for another 50 mikvos, and therefore you get a total of 150 mikvos exactly. Now, right? But I understand why you can't say more. The bottom was square, but maybe maybe only say 1 amma on top. So the Gemara says no. Lo yisagalize, you can't say that. See, the pasuk over there also says alpayim bas yachil. Right? It had 2,000 bas, and bas kamehave. How much is a bas? Shloish side. Right? 3 sa. The chesiv maaseh bas minakor. Because it says over there that the bas, right, is the amount that was taken from a kur, right? So a kur, right, is 30 sa, and therefore a bas is 3 sa, right? 1/10 of it is 3 sa. And therefore, if you go ahead and you basically multiply it out, then it becomes to be right 100 and right. So 150 times right 40 would be 6,000, which is the amount of. That's why it says it was 2,000 bas, which would also be times 3. Right, which would be 6,000, and therefore it all comes out. But instead of there, it can hold 3,000 bas, right? Sahu legutsha. Over there, that just means that if it was basically solid, not liquid, it can hold 3,000. So what does it come to teach us? So he says, Amar Abaye. So Amar Abaye, Shmamina Hai Gutsha Til Sahabi. We see that it's something, if you're trying to go ahead and pile up, right? Solids, not liquids, because liquid obviously can only be hold whatever is in the container. But a solid, you can heap on top, right? A third of it is heaped on top. So basically half of what's inside would be up on top. So like we said, it can fit 2,000 right bas of water, but if it was a solid, it would be able to hold 3,000 because you'd basically be able to have another half heaped on top, obviously only with solids, not liquids. But Tananami also learned, right? Shida Teva Migdal. Right, if you have right a large basket or a container or a closet or a basket, right, and ubor or a pit, usvina, and a large boat, usvina alexandris, even though they have something that can hold the bottom, they can hold 40 sa liquid. But however, that's 2 kur. That's not 40. That's 60 when it comes to dry, because you can throw on top, right, another 20 on top if it holds 40 in the bottom. You can put 20 on top, and tar, and therefore they're tar that's too large and clumsy for a person to go ahead and be able to move. And we know that a kli is only makabel tuma if it's movable. If it's too large of an object and it can't be moved while full, therefore it's considered to be tahira. So these objects, even though they can hold 40, it's only 40 liquid. But when it comes to solids, then you can, including the heap, it would be 60, and therefore it would be too large for one to go ahead and carry. Fine. Naya Mishnah. Mishnah says, by the way, the cats and any of the cats and here today? I didn't see any. I don't mean to call them out, but all right.
He's on the phone.
Okay, beautiful. All right. Now, so Mishnah says, Lachin she'amru goivin asara tfachim. We talked about lechi, right? We talked about the beam till now. We've never really discussed the lechi, the qualifications for the lechi. So lechi she'amru goivin asara tfachim. They have to be 10 tfachim tall. So we said basically a post you put in the ground, but there's a minimum height. It has to be 10 tfachim high. The rachvan oivin kolsha, and its width can be any mountain of Yossi Amir rachvan gil tfachim. Argy says no. There's also a minimum amount for this lechi, this board that you stand up. It has to be 3 tfachim wide. So let's see the Gemara. So lechim shamru v'chulei. So leimatana kasam Rav Eliezer. So we use the word plural lechin, right? Lechis, multiple lechis. Now we had a machlokes earlier when he said a lechi. Do you need one korah, a korah with a lechi, and then there was opinion that said you need 2 lechis. So that was Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer seems to say you need 2 lechis, one on each side. So our mission, which uses the word lechin, right, plural lechi, right, you need both. L'char goes according to Rabbi Eliezer. He holds you need 2 lechis. So I said, "Lo, my lechin b'yama." It doesn't mean you need 2 lechis. It just means lechis in general. Right? If that's the case, right? Our last mission when we said kora, right? The beam, why say koros, right? Right? Karanami needs to koros. My koros b'yama. Then just say, what does koros mean? It means koros in general. So I says, Haki Kamar, Oisin Lachin Shenechu Behen, Rabbi Eliezer, Chamim Goybin Asar Tvach V'Reichvin Avian Kosher. It says, no, those lechis, which Rabbi Eliezer argued with the Chachamim, those lechis, these are the requirements. It doesn't necessarily mean that we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. Rather, it just means that in general, that's what the ones that they're arguing about. These are the heights and the widths. The Kama Kolshu. How much is Kolshu? It says Kolshu. Even the string of a cloak, right, of some sort of a robe or something like that you wear, that is considered to be the thin enough. It doesn't. So there's no minimum thinness at all. And Tana, and it was taught. So also lechi lechatzi mavui. A person made. Let's say he took a lechi. We discussed. He put the lechi at the end of the mavui. Let's say someone put it in the middle of the mavui, right? So it doesn't go all the way to the end, next by the street. It goes only halfway. So what's halacha there? Ein lo ela chatzi mavui. You can only go ahead and carry in half the mavui. So where's this pshit? That's obvious. If that's what the halacha is, that's where the end is. So ela ema yesh lo chatzi mavui. He has half a mavui to move around, and he can't move in the other one. So hanami pshit. That's also obvious. So Malti Moses said leichosh dilma asi lishkimishi bekule. Maybe he would go out and carry. Maybe the problem is that if we allow him to carry in the back half, then he might come carrying the front half beyond the lechi. So maybe he should be forbidden also. Kamash Malon, we don't say that he can carry up into the lechi. And Amar Rava says, Rava asalech lemavoy, we in a karka shlosha, a person made a lechi and he was basically off the ground more than 3 tvachim. Or if it was maybe more 3 tvachim than off the wall, lo asav lo klum. The lechi is no good. In other words, the lechi has to be on the ground, right? And it has to be next to the wall, within 3 both times. Now, even according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Damar Lovewood, that he says Lovewood for even something which is more than 3. Because we saw earlier he says up to 4. So Hani Mili Lamalo. That's only when it's talking about above, about Lamata, when it's down. Mechitza Shagadim Baikim Loy Kamar. In other words, when it comes to Lovewood that's on the ground, in other words, to make something into a wall, then even Rabbi Shimon Gamliel will say the Lovewood is only up to 3. So if it's within 3, then it's good. If not, then it's considered to be something that an animal can go underneath it, and it would not constitute a wall. And Rabbi Yosi Omer Rachvan Shleish Tfachim. Rabbi Yosi says its width is 3 tfachim. He requires a minimum width of 3 tfachim. And Amar Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shmuel Ein Halach Rabbi Yosi. Loi behilme v'loi belachien. Allah is not like Rabbi Yosi, not when it comes to hilme, right? Hilme is basically pickling on Shabbos. Is that considered to be a malacha or not? If it's close to tanning or not? The halacha is not like him when it comes to that. And it's also the halacha is not like him when he says there's a minimum requirement of 3 tfachim for a lechi. So Amar le Rav Huna Bar China behilme amartalan belachin lo amartalan. He says you told halacha by hilme that halacha is not like him. But he never told us when it came to lechi. So ma'ishna behilme the pligi rabbanon. What's the reason why? Because by hilme the rabbanon argued with him, right? So lechi nami pligi rabbanon. So by lechi the rabbanon also argued. So why wouldn't he tell us that halacha is not like him? Why wouldn't you tell us that halacha is not like him when it comes to lechi? So Amar le. Shani Lechi Mishim Dekai Rabbi Kavase. Because Lechi, perhaps Allah could be like him. Why? Because Rabbi holds like him. Rabbi holds it also in a requirement of 3 tefachim for its width. And Rav Rechume Masni Hach Rav Rechume, he taught it this way. Amar Rav Yehuda Bered Rav Yishmol Bar Shiles Mishin Derav. Ein halach Rabbi Yosi lo behilme v'lo belachin. The halach is not like Rabbi Yosi now when it comes to the pickling, and not when it comes to lechi. In Amrule Amarta, did you say this? Amrulu lo. He says, I said it, but I was chayzer. In other words, I don't stand by those words anymore. So Rav says, my goodness, Amrul, you said it. All right, and we learn it from my time of Hadar. Why was he chayzer? Mishum the Rabbi Yosi nemukima, because Rabbi Yosi, I guess ruled with Rabbi Eliezer, and therefore. He ruled Rabbi Yosi, and therefore since he had his svaras, right? Rabbi Yosi had his svaras, therefore maybe the reason could be like Rabbi Yosi when it comes to lechi, and not for sure not like Rabbi Yosi. And Amarle Rava bar Rav Chanle Abaye Hilchas Amai was halacha. So Amarle Puchazi Mai Amadavar. Go see what people do. And you see what the halacha is, and if people go and they do generally. Right, and this, as Rashi points out, the people were already accustomed to do a lechi b'mashu, and therefore they did not require a 3 tefachim lechi. Therefore, since people do that, that's now the halacha. And ika damasi aha. And some say that which he said, go out and see what people do, and that's the halacha, was actually said on something else. A person goes ahead and drinks water because he's thirsty. Omer, he says shahakol niyeh bidvaro. He says the bracha of shahakol niyeh bidvaro is a bracha rishona. Rabbi Tarfan brain the fashos. Rabbi Chazara al Kamasha Barasa. He says, no. What is the bracha rishona? The bracha rishona is brain the fashos. Is the bracha rishona? That's the bracha you make before you drink water. And Amar Leir of Chanla Bai Hilchos Amai was halacha. What bracha do you say before water? Is it shahakol ibivaro or is it brain the fashos? And Amar Leir, and to that he answered, Puk Chazi Mai Ama Devar. Go see what people do, and he saw that people do say shahakol before they drink water. So therefore, that is the halacha, and we will stop here. Yishkoyach, everybody. Thank you for coming in today, and everyone have a wonderful day. Yishkoyach.